Now, the first disaster we're going to talk about today is arguably one of the worst disasters in history. It is known as the Great Kanto earthquake on the island of Honshu, the main island of Japan. So at 11:58 a.m. on the morning of September 1st, 1923, a massive earthquake struck the Japanese island of Honshu. The magnitude was estimated to be about 7.9 to 8.2, and the epicenter was located approximately 60 kilometers southwest of Tokyo underneath the Sagami Bay, when one plate subducted underneath the other. The shaking of the earthquake in the first 15 to 20 seconds was mostly horizontal violent shaking, which shook buildings and caused them to collapse, followed by several massive vertical thrusts all over the region of Kanto, which caused further collapse and knocked people to the ground. So what I mean by that is essentially, if you look here, the initial shaking was back and forth like this. This was the first 15 to 20 seconds. And then there was vertical shaking like this for the next 5 to 10 seconds. And then after that, there was another 15 to 20 seconds of horizontal shaking like this, and then another 5 to 10 seconds of vertical shaking like this. It was an approximately minute-long horror show of shaking all across the area of Honshu. Now, the big issue with this is that when you have that horizontal shaking back and forth, you have obviously buildings start to collapse because buildings are not supposed to go back and forth. Walls collapse, they get disconnected from their connections in different areas, and they'll fall down. But when you add that vertical shaking in, now buildings that are still standing, so if you've got, like, let's look at this building back here in Let's look at this building back here in the corner over here, actually. So you have your initial shaking like this, right? So this building is still standing. So it didn't do too badly. And when you look at this photo, a lot of this is actually fire damage as well as earthquake damage. But you have your horizontal shaking like this, right? So your connections up here are going to be damaged, your connections here are going to be damaged, and your connections at the foundation are going to be damaged. If it doesn't collapse with that first horizontal shaking, it is at least going to move it and weaken those supports, those connections. So when you do that vertical thrust and it causes up and down shaking, now it's going to start disconnecting this direction. So you've got disconnections here, you've got disconnections on the second floor, and a disconnection on the first floor, all throughout. And then when you start that horizontal shaking again, now you have the weakness from the original horizontal shaking along with it coming apart at that disconnection. So now you have that other horizontal shaking. So a lot of the buildings that didn't collapse during the first or the second portion of the shaking collapsed during the third and even the fourth portion of the shaking. This caused approximately 400,000 buildings just in Tokyo alone to be destroyed. And that's not including the fires, which is what's coming up next. So after the shaking was over, and there was approximately about a minute in various areas of Tokyo where it was kind of a stunned silence because there's the loud shaking, there's the loud sound of collapsing buildings, and then you have people that are terrified and they just kind of sit there in utter silence, followed immediately by trying to rescue everyone they can. The problem was the disaster happened at 11:58 a.m. And if you think about that, what is happening right around noon, essentially everywhere in the world? Everyone is starting to cook lunch. It is 1923, so a lot of these people are cooking lunch over braziers and open fires and are doing things like that. So when that happened, a lot of these things tipped over and started fires all throughout the city. Quickly, within a minute to 2-3 minutes after the actual earthquake stopped, there were approximately 130 fires all throughout Tokyo. All of those very quickly began to spread because one of the things that happens when you have an earthquake like this that then has fires, in a normal building, you have pretty good fire spread usually, correct? Like you have various fuel loads, you have plenty of fire spread. But when you have buildings that fall down and collapse and are broken, you have created significantly more areas for that fire to actually spread. Because if you look inside of a room, you can see, okay, I have this couch or whatever in this area that fire can burn there because that's a fuel source, but the rest of it may not have anything. So your couch may be the only thing burning. But if your building collapses and your building's made out of wood, then you have all of that available building material that is in pieces and broken that is now available for fire spread. And that's essentially what happened. Was all of these fires started. The vast majority of fire departments in Tokyo were destroyed. The vast majority of hospitals in Tokyo were destroyed. You have a rescue effort that is centered around rescuing the rescuers first, followed by then rescuing everyone else. On top of, you now have to deal with all of these fires. In addition to all of that, at the same time, there was a large typhoon off the coast of Japan that was creating a very strong wind that spread throughout Tokyo. So you have all of this extra fuel load. You have all of these people that are trapped. Your fires are starting. You have 130 fires all throughout the city that are very rapidly burning and have a significant amount of fuel available to burn. On top of, you have a ton of wind that is able to push this fire even more. So very quickly, these 130 fires combined together into 3 or 4 absolutely massive fires. And many of these fires quickly turned into firestorms. So essentially, if you're looking at our burnt buildings here, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's a ton of buildings all throughout this area on both sides. Very quickly, all of these buildings would have been engulfed. And what happens when you have a fire that's burning all around, you have all of this heat rising up, right? And it's creating a low pressure at the base of all of these fires. So if we switch colors here real quick, you have low pressure, you have a fire here, you have low pressure here, you have a 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 low pressure over here, and so on and so forth. What happens with a fire is you have that low pressure at the base of your fire. In order to continue to have oxygen to fuel that fire, air moves from high pressure areas to low pressure areas. So if you've got over here, you don't have anything burning, your airflow is going to be into this area right here, this low pressure, and this low pressure here, and this low pressure here, and this low pressure here. Now, because they are burning all so close together, they're going to start rotating around each other like that. Because this in the middle here is just going to be a giant low pressure because you have all of this heat around it. This air here in the middle is going to be basically the same pressure as those around it. So all of your air flowing in is going to have to come from outside of this circle. And when it does so, it's going to start rotating around. And it's going to create what is called a firestorm. Essentially, it is a giant whirlwind of fire. Now, there's fire whirls, there's fire tornadoes, and then there's firestorms. Firestorms are the worst of all of them. It essentially incinerates everything inside of it. If I clear off all of my drawing and scribbles here, if you look at the actual background of this photo, aside from a couple buildings off in the background, back over in this area, and a couple buildings over here, this whole area right here is essentially incinerated. There are at least, I would say, probably 7 or 8 buildings here that are completely incinerated. In other photos of the Great Kanto earthquake, large portions of Tokyo are completely incinerated. And because this happened in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, the fires spread quickly, but people were trying to get out as fast as possible. They were going into what was left of their homes or whatever, grabbing their belongings, and then trying to escape the city. So, as these fires spread, your solution here is to get to somewhere that doesn't have anything that can burn, which means going to the middle of an open area. One of those middle of the open areas was called the Hanzhou Clothing Depot, where approximately 30,000 people attempted to shelter in this wide open, essentially park. The problem was there was a fire north of them, there was a fire west of them, and there was a fire south of them. All of those fires converged together and created a firestorm around the area of the Hanzhou Clothing Depot, where those 30,000 people gathered. And it essentially incinerated all 30,000 of them basically together. They essentially all burned to death. Now, there were some people that survived who said it was one of the worst experiences that anyone could possibly imagine. And to be quite honest with you, I can't blame them, because listening to 30,000 people around you die is probably horrifying. Now, as these fires spread, not only did they head towards wide open areas where they thought that the flames couldn't get to them, but they also jumped into a number of small ponds that were located around Tokyo. And there were a number of people who leapt into these ponds in a belief that the water would protect them, but the fires were so intense, the firestorms were so intense, it began to boil the pond, and a number of people were boiled alive trying to hide inside of the ponds. But in addition to people being burned to death, people dying of being boiled alive in ponds, people dying crushed under buildings, people dying of smoke inhalation, not being able to escape from the fires. There were a number of people that were killed in crowd crushes throughout the entire city because there were so many people trying to escape all at the same time in very narrow areas that they suffocated to death of positional asphyxiation, which is absolutely horrifying. There were so many people that died in this disaster. The conservative estimate, the absolute lowest estimate you will get for the number of deaths from this disaster is 105,000 people. That is the conservative guess. The top end is somewhere around 150,000 people died. And that's from all potential deaths. That's asphyxiation from smoke, asphyxiation from crowd crushes, burning to death, drowning, being crushed by buildings as they collapsed. There were a number of people that tried to escape on boats, and their boats caught on fire from the wind blowing embers onto them. It was a horror show. This is arguably one of the worst disasters in history, most likely. At least one of the worst, probably the worst modern disaster that existed. But in addition to all of that, all of the communication in the city essentially went down. Essentially all government buildings, again, all fire stations, all police departments, almost all hospitals, 400,000 homes, just everything everywhere was destroyed. And because of that lack of communication, rumors quickly spread after the disaster that groups of Koreans, specifically Koreans, were organizing attacks on victims and committing arson to loot, which led to what is called the Kanto massacre, when nearly 6,000 Koreans were murdered as a result of these rumors by roving bands of people that had survived the disaster. They would essentially ask them to pronounce things in Japanese that were known to be hard for Koreans to pronounce, and if they couldn't pronounce it properly, they killed them. That happened for a significant amount of time. And a lot of that, at least some of it, was spread by Japanese government officials who said, hey, this is a thing that we think is happening. Be on the lookout for it. Now, there were other Japanese officials who said, no, that's not happening. And they had soldiers go out and essentially stop people from doing that. But it was a major, major issue in the aftermath of this disaster. The devastation from the earthquake and fires was total, almost total. And most insurance policies in Tokyo at the time had earthquake exclusion clauses that prevented payouts. So even though the building was destroyed by an earthquake and then burned by fire, they weren't getting paid for the fire damage because it was caused by an earthquake. Now, the government eventually stepped in and said, hey, you need to pay out at least some. So there was some help, but it was not nearly enough. In addition, on top of that, the unemployment rate in Tokyo hit 45%. 45% of all people in Tokyo were unemployed after the disaster because, again, essentially everything in the city was completely destroyed. The aftermath of this disaster, when you lose all government, everything, all hospitals, all schools, homes, fire departments, factories, stores, all of that weighed heavily on Japan for a long time after this disaster, even to this day. September 1st, which is the day this earthquake happened, became known as Disaster Prevention Day in Japan to help them prepare and respond to disasters. It still is Disaster Prevention Day in Japan to this day. And in addition, the memory of this disaster and the fires afterward heavily impacted how Japanese civilians reacted to the fire bombings of Tokyo during World War II by the United States military. Moving on to our next disaster on September 2nd. It is the Great Fire of London. The first Great Fire of London, actually, because there's been two Great Fires of London. There was the one in 1666, and then there was the one during the Blitz in World War II. But we are talking about the first Great Fire of London. So it started in the early morning hours of September 2nd, 1666, in a bakery located off of Pudding Lane in London, England. The fire quickly spread to the buildings surrounding it, and the mayor of London at the time, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was called to the scene because he would be the one that was in charge of dealing with fire response. And at the time, he was concerned that really the only fire spread prevention they had was to pull down buildings so that they could get them out of the way so that there wouldn't be anything else for the fire to actually burn. The problem was, number one, he didn't feel like he had the authority to say, hey, you can pull down these people's buildings, because the majority of the buildings surrounding the bakery on Pudding Lane were rental buildings, and they couldn't get a hold of the landlords to say, hey, we're pulling your building down. Can we do that? So he essentially said no, and in several sources basically was stated that the fire was so small that a woman could piss it out. That is a direct quote from several sources, that basically the fire was no big deal and a woman could pee on it and it would go out. Unfortunately, that would not be the case in this situation. The fire very, very quickly began to spread well beyond those first buildings, and by the time Bloodworth decided that it was worth it to start pulling down buildings, it was way too late. There was also a very strong easterly wind that was significantly aiding in the ability of this fire to spread quickly. It essentially destroyed the majority of the medieval portion of the city that was inside the Roman walls at the time. So there was the medieval portion of London that was the original area of London that was originally founded as Londinium and then was owned by the Romans. They built a wall around it and had since grown well past the Roman walls. But the fire actually started within the Roman walls, and it essentially destroyed all of the buildings inside the Roman walls, and then it went a little bit past it as well. Numerous attempts were made throughout the next several days, because this fire would burn for 4 full days before eventually being able to be contained, to pull down buildings to halt the spread of the fire. But the wind was so strong that it continued to spread even further. In addition to that, the fire was able to jump the River Thames. American pronunciation is a little difficult of that one. Anyway, the fire was able to jump the river because London Bridge at the time was full of homes. All along the edges of the bridges were giant tenement buildings on either side, and the fire just spread along the tenement buildings to the exterior of the other side of London Bridge, causing significant fire damage there as well. In addition, the original St. Paul's Cathedral, which had a lead roof and was made out of wood, was originally believed by the people who were trying to pull all of their belongings and put them somewhere safe, was originally believed to be a safe location because it was in the middle of a wide open park. But the problem was At the time, St. Paul's Cathedral was undergoing construction and so was surrounded by wood scaffolding on all sides. Because of that strong wind, embers and ashes and all of that were blown directly into the scaffolding where they landed and were able to ignite St. Paul's Cathedral and essentially burnt it to the ground with a significantly larger fuel load, because a lot of the area around St. Paul's Cathedral were printing presses and things like that. So they took all of their printing press material and they shoved it into St. Paul's Cathedral thinking that it would be safe there, and they essentially made it burn down even easier. Eventually, the wind did abate and they were able to get the fire under control by Wednesday, September 4th into Thursday, September 5th. The official death toll for this disaster, as reported by the Crown at the time, King Charles, was 8 people. It burned down approximately 20,000 buildings, give or take. They're saying the death toll was 8 people. I can guarantee you that is not accurate at all. 100%, there is absolutely no way only 8 people died in the first Great Fire of London. 100%, absolutely not. Especially because it started in the middle of the night. So there were likely a lot of people who never actually woke up and just died of smoke inhalation or burned to death inside their homes before they had any idea what was happening. It's likely that the death toll was in the hundreds, if not the thousands. With how much was available to burn, essentially the entire city would have been made out of wood, very old wood, which would burn significantly better. It's dried out. It's probably rotten in some locations. It will burn significantly well. This likely also would have started a firestorm, which has temperatures that will reach enough to essentially turn a human body to ash. So there were likely a significant number of people that there were essentially no remains left of that were anything recognizable beyond white ash. And a lot of people that likely died were incredibly poor and would not have been recognized by those counting anyway, especially if they were foreign or something of that nature. There's no way. There is absolutely zero way only 8 people died in this disaster. Now, one of the things that came out of the Great Fire of London in 1666 was the claim that because the fire burned down the medieval portion of the city, it killed all of the rats that carried the Black Plague, because London never had another plague outbreak again. But this is likely inaccurate because at the time, the majority of plague victims were outside of the medieval walls, or the Roman walls, that is, outside of the medieval portion of the city. It was in the slums on the exterior of the Roman walls. And on top of that, plague outbreaks were already on the downswing in London anyway. So it's likely that this was just a thing that happened and someone connected the dots of, well, we had significantly less plague victims after the fire than we did before the fire. So the fire is the reason that we didn't have any more outbreaks. It's likely a combination of things. They were already on the downswing, and it wasn't even the area where the plague was happening in London anyway. So that's unlikely to be true. London, obviously, was rebuilt after the fire. Much of the Roman wall, well, I shouldn't say much of the Roman wall. Some of the Roman wall still exists in London, but there were a number of ideas of how to rebuild London, and essentially all of them were ignored, and they built it basically the same as the medieval city. There were some additions for fire safety, a little bit more wider roads so that there was less ability for embers to travel across, things like that. But for the most part, it was rebuilt basically the exact same way. Now, our next disaster for this week is from September 5th of 1996, Hurricane Fran. Now, Hurricane Fran originally formed from a tropical wave off the coast of Africa on August 23rd, 1996, as a tropical depression. Now, it initially struggled to develop due to the presence of Hurricane Edward, which eventually it moved past and reached hurricane status on August 29th before weakening back to a tropical storm, before again reaching hurricane status on September 2nd and reaching Category 3 status on September 5th just before making landfall near Cape Fear, North Carolina. The storm in particular caused a 12-foot storm surge that caused significant damage up and down the coast of North Carolina. It also dumped a large amount of rainfall throughout North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. In total, the storm caused 27 fatalities and over $5 billion worth of damage, making it one of the most destructive hurricanes to ever hit the Carolinas. It was also the last major hurricane to make direct landfall in the Carolinas. They have not had a major hurricane hit the Carolinas. They haven't had a major hurricane make landfall in the Carolinas since 1996. Now, they've had other hurricanes as well as the remnants of other hurricanes. Looking at you, Hurricane Helene last year. But this is the only one that has hit the Carolinas, made landfall in the Carolinas as a major hurricane. Now, a major hurricane is category 3, 4, or 5. 1 and 2 is just regular hurricane, and then there's a tropical storm before that and tropical depression. This is the only major category hurricane that has made landfall in the Carolinas since 1996. And then our last disaster for this week was the Gulf Hotel fire on September 7th, 1943. On that date, just after midnight, a fire broke out on the second floor of the Gulf Hotel in Houston, Texas. The hotel was primarily used by men who were poor. Cots cost about 20 to 40 cents a night, and the majority of the 133 guests in the building were incredibly poor, drunk, or injured in some way. The hotel itself was on the second and third floor, so you can see second floor here, third floor here, with businesses of various types down here on the first floor. Now, the fire originally is believed to have started from a carelessly discarded cigarette on a mattress in one of the rooms. The night clerk was called to a second floor room and essentially was helped by a couple of the guests to extinguish the fire in the mattress. Not wanting to leave a charred mattress sitting in the room where everyone could smell it, because a lot of these were open rooms or they were just divided by really thin wooden partitions, he moved it to a closet on the second floor and then went back to the actual front desk. Sometime later, he was called again and found smoke on the third floor and a massive fire burning on the second floor. The problem with this is there were only 2 exits from the second and third floor. There was a fire escape on the exterior of the building, which you can see right here. That's the fire escape. And then there was an interior portion of the building. There was an interior stairwell, which was somewhere in this general vicinity, both of which were the only 2 exits. You could either get out this one over here, or you could go down the interior stairwell. The problem with the interior stairwell is the fire spread in such a way that the interior stairwell essentially acted as a chimney to allow the fire to spread up to the third floor, and it was very quickly blocked by smoke and flames, which only left the exterior fire escape, which you see right here, as the exit from the building. But then, once people started to realize that they couldn't get out the interior, they went down the exterior, and the majority of people who made it out of the building first were, unfortunately, those who were trying to make it down this very narrow fire escape on crutches. These crutches caused them to back up significantly and left a number of people trapped up on the third floor, because as people tried to get down, it started a crowd crush trying to get out the exit, and they eventually attempted to get back into the inside and became trapped upstairs. The interior stairway, again, blocked by fire, and essentially that left either waiting right here as fire started to shoot out the top of the windows, or jumping out the windows to the ground below. Now, if you look at this, you can see how the first floor is incredibly tall, and then the second floor is not nearly as tall. The third floor is not nearly as tall. So this jump would have been harrowing at best, especially from the third floor. Several people did attempt to jump. Several men did attempt to jump, and at least 2 died on impact with the ground. One man hit an awning over here that's no longer there because it's been taken out by his body. hit the awning, and then hit the ground and died. One man jumped out of the third floor over in this general area, landed on the ground, and then part of the building fell on top of him that was on fire, and he burned to death trapped underneath that portion of the building that fell on top of him. There were no smoke detectors. There was no general alarm system. So everyone on the inside who woke up had to yell to wake up everyone else around them to tell them to get out, which contributed to the 55 people death toll inside this building. The majority of which were on the third floor up in here when they became trapped by the blocked fire escape and the blocked interior stairwell. In total, 55 men died in the Gulf Hotel fire, making it the deadliest fire in Houston history, and one that's honestly not really well talked about. There is some discussion in various sources and news articles from the time that there were supposed to be lighted exit locations for the fire escape and the interior stairwell, and they were not working at the time, which added to confusion as to where exactly the fire escapes were. There was also confusion as to how to actually get out of the hotel itself, as there were a number of wooden partitions and things like that that caused confusion among the guests, which led to a significant death toll. So with that, we've reached the end of this week's Disasters in History. We'll be back next week on Monday to go through some more disasters in history that happened the week of September 8th to September 15th. So if you want to come back and join us, that would be great. I'll always be here to talk about disasters. Thank you guys for watching. As always, remember to check your smoke detector batteries and stay safe.